while I was researching about Ikigai, I think one thing quite interesting which I came across was that Ikigai doubles as both a mentor and a legal advice of the sorts to startups, right? Given your personal interest in the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem, so I want to pick your brain on something that captured the Indian media's attention back in April, besides COVID-19, that is, and that is the new Indian investment rules targeted towards China. While tensions with China are at an all-time high right now, do you think that the new policy which has come into the picture is a justified response, or is it restrictive and problematic for early stage startups which seek Chinese funding regularly?
Yeah, I think you already somewhat answered the question. So I see. I think it is increasingly becoming important to have some kind of some checks in place, and I will talk about it a little. But there is definitely a concern, and a concern that I personally share with you is that if you look at the pre-COVID scenario, the entire last couple of years, year and a couple of years, in fact, the amount of Chinese money that has kept the Indian startup ecosystem afloat is not negligible, and and therefore, if we make it very hard for Chinese money to flow into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, we definitely have to prepare for its repercussions. If you talk to the government today, the government says that, well, yes, of course, but why can't we have the Indian the investor pool rise up to the occasion at this juncture? And why can't we incentivize Indian investors, in fact, to put in money into the venture capital ecosystem? Well, that's a noble thought. But all said and done, if you look at it, the bulk, the really heavy money that comes in and the heavy expertise that comes in along with that money typically has come from outside of our shores. And that is not going to change overnight. And even if it were to change, I don't think there's any reason to cut off this other source of funding and expertise and strategic kind of benefits that might come out of it. Now, so I think a slightly more nuanced and a more balanced policy would have been warranted. Having said that, there definitely are concerns. The concerns, however, need not be targeted at one country. They need to be. If your concern is that, well, Indian startup assets are going to be available on the block at significantly depressed prices and will be taken over by foreign investors, then that concern is not just why is it limited just to the Chinese investor? Having said that, this entire narrative has become slightly more complex with the events that have just happened in the recent past, with the aggression on the on the borders with China. And there's definitely I think you will see that the conversation becomes a little more complex now. So just to give you an example, we know that a couple of Chinese companies in India, so I'm not talking about Indian investees, but just Chinese companies who operate out of and have their own people from China in India, are today having to are finding it very hard because there's an increased kind of scrutiny on things. You shouldn't be completely surprised if some plain clothed person from the IB walks up to your office and starts asking you questions. So those are definitely kind of those are the kind of things that are happening today. And for that reason, I think this is an even more complicated area to comment on now.
A very delicate issue of the sorts. I think there was something I read recently which stuck with me. So I think the United States has their own legislative body, which is known as CFIUS, right? Which looks at all overseas investments which are taking place and whether they act as a strategic deterrent or a strategic problem of the sorts for national security issues, right? So should India have a body of such magnitude of its own, which is overlooking each and every deal, or is that once again too huge a regulatory response as compared to the problem?
Well, I'm not fully familiar with the CFIUS framework, but this is what I'll have to say, that In fact, something that we spoke about when we started our podcast, like any legislative action or governmental action should be proportionate to the risk and concern
Right.
that you have to address, right? So I think a proportionate measure is what is warranted here. For large deals, large amounts of money flowing in from China into a particular company, into a sensitive sector, maybe warrants that kind of a review for sure. Um, but if you're going to essentially ask me to go seek an approval for a $50,000 check from a Chinese company in a sector which is, say, vernacular content, content maybe still there might be just some kind of concern, but something which is.
I understand.
yeah.
Any industry which does not pose a national security
Right,
threat.
right, and then so I think that's why I said you need a slightly more nuanced, a slightly more balanced policy around
Right.
this, which is proportionate.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode. The Indianaut Podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook to receive all updates on the upcoming episodes. We'll see you in the next one.